Muscular system in our body is the one that helps us move, stabilize our body, and produces heat. There are about 600 to 700 different muscles in our body, depending on how well these muscles are defined and developed. Muscles work with the skeletal system and nervous system to maintain and coordinate different functions in our body. For example, movement, posture, stability, and heat production. The muscle, based on their tissue and cells, are of three different types. The skeletal muscle, the muscles which are attached with the bones through tendons, and their main role is movement, and they are the ones that can be controlled with your own will. The cardiac muscle, which are present in the heart, and they beat in a rhythmic and synchronized manner, and they are not under our will. The smooth muscles are also involuntary. They are also not under our will. They are found in the walls or areas around the internal organs, such as digestive tract, blood vessels, and uterus. They are helpful in setting the tone of internal organs, their contraction, and also contributing to their functions. Let's look at the structure or anatomy of muscle. The muscles are joined to the bones. So this is a bone and this is a muscle, and they are joined through tendons. So muscles are basically the bundles of muscle cells. And if you look at the bundle of this muscle cell and pick out one muscle cell, this muscle cell is called a muscle fiber. Muscle fibers are the basic unit or the main cell that makes up your muscle. Inside each of these muscle cells, you have a basic anatomy or basic structure of a cell. You would have a membrane, which is called the sarcolemma. In general term, you would call it a plasma membrane. Then you have cytoplasm, which in muscle cell is called sarcoplasm. Just like any other cell, they have nucleus, other cell organelles, and a very important structure of its own, which is characteristic of a muscle cell, are myofibrils. So these myofibrils are the bundles of protein which are responsible for contraction. And we will further look at the structural arrangement of these muscle fibers or myofibrils as we go through this lecture. So let's look at the structure of a muscle cell again. What would you have in a cell? A membrane. Here it's called sarcolemma. You would have mitochondria, another important cell organelle. You would have nucleus. There are several nuclei in the skeletal muscle, and then you have these rod-like structures called myofibrils. Let's look at the zoom in structure of a myofibril. So the myofibril have these bending patterns, and these bending patterns are repeated, and these repeated units are called sarcomeres. So let's talk about one sarcomere. One sarcomere extends from one Z disc to a Z disc. So Z disc to Z disc is one sarcomere. You can cut the myofibril into several small pieces called sarcomere. The middle line is your M line. The M line is the midpoint and Z discs are the edges. So attached to the midline are the thick filaments. So these thick filaments are made up of myosin protein. Extending from Z disc are thin filaments, and these thin filaments are made up of actin proteins. Now, if you look at the arrangement of thin and thick filaments, you will see a banding pattern. So the zone where you see most of the thick band is the A band. The region where you don't see the thick band but you only have thin band is the I band. And The region where you only have thick band and no overlapping thin bands is the H zone. Now let's understand the process of muscle contraction. The first step is the muscle receiving a signal from brain. So the brain sends a signal to the muscle. So this is a muscle and this is a neuron. Brain sends the signal to the muscle through neurons. The neurons talk to muscle at a neuromuscular junction. At neuromuscular junction, the neuron talks to muscle through a chemical messenger called a neurotransmitter. Here this neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. The acetylcholine goes and sits on the receptors that are present on the muscle. These receptors then let the sodium ions get inside the muscle, and entry of sodium ions onsets the electrical impulse or action potential in the muscles. This action potential then triggers the release of calcium ions from the endoplasmic reticulum of muscle cells. This calcium released from endoplasmic reticulum is very important, and let's understand its role. So the thick filament, which we talked about earlier, is made up of myosin protein, and thin filament is made up of actin protein. What you're seeing here in the picture is only a thin filament. These are actin proteins and they are making a thin filament. But myosin protein, which is not visible in this picture, has to come and bind with the actin protein. But the problem is the binding sites of actin protein are covered by another protein called tropomyosin. Now, what will calcium do? Calcium comes in and binds with the third protein called the troponin. And troponin is then able to pull away this tropomyosin and expose the binding sites of actin, where now myosin come and attach. Now what you're seeing here are the exposed, so these dark green dots, consider them as the binding site for myosin. So actin, which initially was covered by tropomyosin, has now exposed its binding sites. Now myosin can come and attach with actin at these binding sites. At the head of myosin is an ATP molecule. This ATP molecule undergoes hydrolysis, and this hydrolysis is what releases energy, and that triggers the cross-linking between myosin and actin. Then the inorganic phosphate and ADP, the hydrolyzed ATP, is now released from the myosin head. And this release of phosphate and ADP leads to change in the shape of myosin, and you see that it changes from this shape to this shape. This change in shape leads to a power stroke. So it's able to stroke actin filament a step in the other direction. As you keep making these power strokes, you keep moving the filament in the other direction one step at a time. But ultimately you have to remove the connection between actin and myosin, because otherwise this contraction will keep happening. To end this contraction, a new ATP molecule comes and sits on the head of myosin protein, and the myosin then gets detached from the actin protein. After detaching, this ATP molecules gets hydrolyzed into ADP and inorganic phosphate, and myosin again regains its original shape. For the muscle contraction to end, first thing that has to stop is the signal that is coming from your neuron. So the neurons have to stop sending more acetylcholine. How does it do that? The acetylcholine is broken down by acetylcholine esterase, and then it no longer is able to trigger the contraction in the muscle fiber. Then calcium has to return back into the endoplasmic reticulum. When there is no more calcium available, the tropomyosin again covers the binding sites of actin protein, which you are seeing here. The exposed green dots are completely covered with the tropomyosin, and without that exposure, there is no connection between, no more connection is possible between actin and myosin, and the cross bridging is broken. There are two major types of muscle contractions: isotonic and isometric. Isotonic is where the muscle change is seen in terms of the change in their length. For example, sometimes you can see muscles are becoming shorter. For example, here when you're curling your bicep, it's a concentric isotonic contraction. Eccentric isotonic contraction is when your muscle is actually becoming longer. As you can see, when you lower your dumbbell, you see the muscle becoming longer. Isometric is when you don't really see any change in the muscle length despite a force being generated, despite muscle is contracting, but you don't see a change in length. So for example, when you're trying to push a wall, although you are pushing it with force, you are contracting your muscle, but you're not seeing any change in your in the length of your muscle. The main sources of energy for muscle contraction are primarily the ATP that is produced in the cellular respiration, but then there are other ways through which the ATP can be generated. A quick source of generating ATP is the creatine phosphate system, which is a backup system in your muscle. If your body lacks enough oxygen, then it can switch to aerobic respiration, in which lactate or lactic acid are formed, and this lactic acid accumulation over time leads to muscle fatigue, but still for a short amount of time it gives you energy for muscle contraction. But for a long-term and a sustained energy source, you need aerobic respiration. So as you start working out, your oxygen requirement increases. You need to take in more oxygen, produce more energy in aerobic respiration, but you cannot take in so much oxygen and constantly produce energy, so it kind of plateaus at how much oxygen you can consume. This leads to oxygen debt, because now your body is lacking enough oxygen to keep performing aerobic respiration. It leads to one, lack of enough ATP produced. Second, you switch to anaerobic respiration that forms lactic acid, and also you have imbalance of ions in your body. All this leads to muscle fatigue. The recovery phase involves replenishing the oxygen deficiency or oxygen debt. So you rest for some time, you switch back to aerobic respiration, the lactic acid from your muscles is removed, and your the amount of ATP or creatine phosphate that your body need at a baseline is recovered, and then your muscle fatigue goes away. Extensive resistance training and workout can increase your muscle size, and that is called hypertrophy of muscles. Basically, you're building more actin and myosin filaments in your body, so it has to be supplemented with a high protein diet. Sometimes when you're not using some muscles enough, or there is some degenerative disorder, it leads to wasting of muscles, and that is called muscular dystrophy. The major muscles of your upper body are your deltoid muscle in your shoulder, bicep and tricep at the back, and your pectoral muscle, which kind of holds your chest region with your shoulder. In the core, you have abdominal and oblique muscles. The abdominal muscles can be running parallelly or transversely, and oblique muscles can be the internal oblique or the external oblique muscles depending on where they are present. In lower body, you have quadricep muscles in your thigh, you have hamstring at the back of your thigh, and you have calf muscles in the lower part of your leg. Again, very important lower body muscles. In the back, you have another important muscle called the trapezius, which is trapezoid in shape, and on your sides you have latissimus, which are also called lats, sometimes derived from the word lateral on the sides of your body. Common disorders of your muscular system can be muscular dystrophy, which is a genetic disorder in which your muscles get weakened and you lose the structure and function of your muscles. Or myasthenia gravis, which is an autoimmune disorder in which your neuromuscular junction is affected and you're not properly able to coordinate the facial expressions, or it's kind of uncontrolled movement of your muscles. Fibromyalgia is the chronic pain of your muscles, and tendonitis is the inflammation of your tendons. Overstretching or tearing of your muscles can lead to strain. Sudden involuntary contraction of your muscles can cause cramps, and severe muscle fiber rupture is called a tear. Common treatments that you can do by yourself are taking rest, putting ice compression, and elevating your muscle for easing your pain. But then visiting a doctor and getting a proper scan of what's going on is a good idea. As you age, you constantly lose muscle mass, and that is called sarcopenia. This can be avoided for some time by strength training, by proper nutrition, because if you don't strength train and you don't have a good diet, it can lead to loss of your muscle strength, and your recovery time from any kind of strain would be pretty long. Here are some fun facts about muscles. The strongest muscle of your body is the one in your jaw, which is this masseter muscle. The longest muscle in your body is the one that runs from your hip to your knee, kind of runs obliquely and is the longest. The fastest contracting muscle is the one in your eye, which blinks as a reflex. So suddenly light enters your eye and very quickly you are able to close your eyes because your eye muscle work very fast. And muscle make up about 40% of your body weight.